Hello everyone, welcome to day 6 in our soap making for beginners mini-series. I am Anne, one half of the Sussex Handmade Soap Company. Wayne is just over there looking out the window at the moment, leaving me in peace for the recording. And today we are on day 6 of our soap making for beginners mini-series, which means we are creating a soap with a layer, so a 2-colour layered soap with a textured top. If you have watched our videos so far in this mini-series, you'll be getting a little bit familiar with our recipe, and yesterday you will have seen us make our actual first loaf of soap. Today we are using the exact same recipe that we used yesterday. The only difference is we are adding in a couple of micas for colour, and we're changing the fragrance from lavender to peppermint just because it's adding in a little bit of variation. You can fragrance with any kind of scent that takes your fancy. It doesn't have to be peppermint, it can be whatever you want, as long as the fragrance you choose is safe for your use in soap. You do need to check the IFRA documents if you're using fragrance oil to check the safe usage amount for soap, and essential oils you also need to check the level that your chosen essential oil is safe for use in soap as well, because they can vary. This is the recipe we are using. It is the recipe that we used yesterday. I have got it printed out again for reference, and I would suggest that you also print it out for reference because it is really handy to have the recipe easily to hand when you are making soap, just to double check anything that you need to. So first off, we need to clean down our sides, get everything moved out of the way, especially anything that comes into contact with food or any food stuff. We're going to move all that out the way. We are going to put our safety gear on, our goggles, our gloves, our long sleeves and our closed-toe shoes, and then we're going to begin making the soap. So let's all get that done and move on to making the soap. So today's 2-layer different coloured soap is actually going to begin in much the same way as the soap that we made yesterday. There are a couple of subtle differences, but I will explain these when we come to them. So the first thing we want to do is weigh out our solid and our liquid oils, and again I've got my recipe just here next to me for reference if I need it, and as I said earlier, it is the same recipe that we used yesterday. So I'm going to start by weighing our coconut oil, and as per yesterday we need 200 grams of coconut oil weighed out into our nice clean saucepan. And that is our 200 grams of coconut oil that I'm now going to put to one side while I weigh out our liquid oils. So just like yesterday, we need our castor oil, and just like yesterday, we need to weigh out 40 grams of castor oil. And I always find castor oil one of the trickier oils to weigh because it is very sticky and quite a heavy oil too, and it is very easy to weigh too much of it, so you have to be slow and steady as you weigh out castor. And now we need to weigh our main oil that makes up the majority of our soap, and that is our olive oil, and we need 560 grams of olive oil. As per yesterday's video, if you don't feel confident weighing into the same jug that you've already weighed your castor oil into, you can weigh into a separate jug and then combine them together after they have been weighed. It is often easier to do that because it is very easy to go slightly over with the oils, and once they've been combined it is harder to obviously separate them out if you're pouring them into the same jug. And we weigh in grams because it is more reliable than millilitres or cup measurements. And indeed, if you are in the UK and you want to sell your soaps eventually, your assessor will generally want your measurements in grams. There we go, 560 grams of olive oil safely weighed out. And this is where we are going to do something slightly different to yesterday, because we want to colour today's soap for our 2 layers. We want to prepare our colours now. And I have chosen to colour my soap with 2 different shades of blue, Tropical Temptations and Hollywood Gaze from Resonate. I've chosen to use mica for the beginner's recipe because although we do like our natural colourants. I tend to feel that for a beginner it is much easier to start colouring soaps with micas. The results are more consistent, they are slightly easier to work with, so we are going with mica for our beginner's recipe. So those are our two colours, which I shall pop here, and we just need to weigh out into these tiny little measuring cups 1 gram of each colour into a cup. So we are going to pop in the Hollywood Gaze colour first, and you can choose whatever colours you fancy. I say we are doing blue today in our example because we're going to go with a lovely peppermint kind of beachy colour scheme, because I do like my beachy colour schemes. So that is 1 gram of the Hollywood Gaze mica, and now we're going to weigh out 1 gram of the Tropical Temptations. And that is 1 gram of the Tropical Temptation. And now what you want to do is take around about a teaspoon of your mix of olive and castor oil and just pop a teaspoon of oil into each of the mica powders, and we are doing this to help disperse that colour so that when we add it into our batter later on, it hopefully incorporates a little bit more easily and a little bit nicer. I'm using these old sort of lolly sticks to mix the colour in. I find keeping lolly sticks is really useful because they do come in very handy when mixing up colours. So we just want to mix in our colours into our oil, then we're going to pop these to one side and we will come back to them later when it is time to colour our soap. So now we are also going to weigh out our essential oil for use in our soap later, and we've chosen to use peppermint today, and we're going to be using 16 grams of peppermint, which equates to 2% of our soap recipe. If you wish to use a different scent, you can. Many essential oils can be used up to 3% in a soap recipe, but you do need to check the documents because certain ones cannot be used at 3%, and they include lemongrass and Mei Chang and cinnamon leaf, which are all limited and have a much lower safe usage amount. So if you aren't sure, check online and find out how much essential oil you can safely use in your soap, because it does vary from oil to oil. In the UK you can't use more than 3%, but certain oils you must use less. And it's the same for fragrance oils. You will need to check your IFRA document, which you can find generally online from the place that you purchased the fragrance oil, and that will tell you what level you can safely use in soap. But if you are in the UK and you do want to sell your soaps, eventually you can't use over 3% regardless of what any documents say, because that is just UK rules. So we are going for 16 grams today, 2%. And we're going to measure down the chopstick because it pours really nicely when using a chopstick to pour out the oil. And pouring the oils like this is just one of those things that you just have to take a little bit of time. You can't rush it or you will end up going over and spilling it. So just take your time when pouring out your essential oils or your fragrance oils. And we do always weigh in grams as well when we are popping fragrance oils into our soap, because as I said earlier, it is more reliable than teaspoon measurements or cup measurements. So now that we have got our oils safely prepared and put to one side, it is time to prepare our lye water solution. And this here is our lye, and obviously this is where you need to be extremely careful. So we need 110.5 grams of lye today for this recipe. So we're going to slowly and carefully pour it into our bowl. So that is 110.5 grams of lye there. I'm going to put this to one side while I weigh out the water that we need to go with the lye. So we are using a 2-to-1 water to lye ratio, and that means we need 221 grams of water for our recipe today. And it is cool water we are using. You do not use warm or hot water when preparing lye solutions. And now I'm going to take this over to my sink and I'm going to prepare my lye water solution in the way that I showed you in video number 2, which I shall link. If you haven't watched it, I shall link it somewhere on the screen, and you can go and watch that video, and that shows you in depth how to prepare your lye water solution. And for today's recipe, you want your lye water to cool down to around about 115 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around about 46 degrees C. So that is a temperature that you will need to cool your lye water to today. So while your lye water is cooling down, you can start melting down your coconut oil, and you want to melt it on a low heat until it has just melted. You don't want to overheat it or you're going to have to bring it down in temperature, which is going to be a pain. So we have gently melted our coconut oil here, and now we are going to add in our olive and our castor oil. Just slowly pouring the olive and castor into the melted coconut and using a spatula to make sure that all of that oil is scraped down and into the pan. And then we stir it to combine, and then we are going to use our temperature gun to take the temperature, and I imagine it may need heating up a little. Yep, we are at 76 Fahrenheit and we want to be at 115, so we're going to pop this back onto a gentle heat and slowly bring it up to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've gently warmed our oils back up now, and we are at 112 degrees Fahrenheit, which is absolutely fine because we are aiming for 115 with our lye. And you generally want your oils and lye to be, well, within 10 degrees Fahrenheit of each other, and preferably within 5 degrees Fahrenheit. I know some people aren't fussed by temperatures, but we do like to try and keep them within 5 degrees of each other. And our lye is 113 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is a good temperature. I know I said 115, but honestly, 113, I am more than happy with that. It is not a major issue if we are a couple of degrees out. So now we are going to carefully add in our lye water to our liquid oils. Again, you want to carefully pour the lye water into the oil. Do it nice and slowly to try and minimise air bubbles. I know some people do actually pour their lye over their stick blender or their spatula to minimise air bubbles. We personally don't do that, but you can do it if you wish to. Now you're going to need to take your stick blender, and we are just going to be stirring and pulsing until we reach an emulsion, which is where the lye and the oils have combined and are not going to separate out. We want it to be an emulsion today because we are going to be colouring those 2 portions of soap in a minute, and we will then be bringing them to a thicker trace. So stir and pulse. Stir. And pulse. And stir again. And I am showing you this in real time because I think as a beginner it may help you to actually see how long this is taking for me to do. So I know it may be a little on the dull side watching me do this, but I'm not cutting it deliberately so you can see the length of time it is taking. And here we have now got an emulsion / light trace. And because we want 2 different colours, we need to split this batter down now. So I have got 2 fresh, clean jugs. And you do not need to weigh the batter to make sure it is exactly even. You can if you want to, but there's no real need. You can just eyeball it. So I'm going to tip some into this one, and then some into this one, and they are looking to me to be relatively even. I say it does not have to be exact. And now we are going to work with 1 portion at a time. So we are going to add half of our essential oil. So that there is roughly half. Into portion number 1. We can get rid of portion number 2 for the moment. And we're just going to mix in that essential oil. And we are also going to add in our first colour. So I am going to use the darker blue to begin with. As I said, you can use whichever colour you want to. It is completely down to how you want your soap to look. So I'm scraping as much of this colour as possible out of this tiny little measuring cup, which isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. And now we are just going to mix it in with the spatula, just to combine it a little. And now, because we're doing a 2-layer soap, we want a medium to slightly thick trace for our lower layer so that it sets up nice and quickly. So we just go back in with the stick blender, and you are just going to repeat the whisking and pulsing with the blender until it thickens up a little, because we are still very runny here at the moment. And again, I am going to do this in real time for you guys, so it may take a little while. Feel free to skip if you feel confident with thickening it yourself. And we have now got a nice medium sort of trace going on, which is going to work nicely for the layering technique we are doing today. And this is the kind of consistency that you are going for. So let's say a medium kind of trace there today. So we need to pull in our mould now, and we are going to pour this lower layer. So as with yesterday's recipe, this is filling a 2.5 pound loaf mould, and you just want to carefully pour your batter down the centre into the base of the mould, making sure to scrape the edges down to get as much of the batter out of the jug and into the mould as possible. Once it is all in the mould, you want to give it a little shake from side to side to level it out, and a tap down. And that will hopefully release any air bubbles so that your soap doesn't have trapped air bubbles in it. And you now want to pop this to one side, and we can work on that second layer now. So pop this to one side while you work on the remaining batter. So with your remaining batter, the first thing you want to do is add in your remaining essential or fragrance oil. That is if you have chosen to use essential oil or fragrance oil. You can absolutely leave the soap unscented if you want to. It does not have to be scented. So you blend your fragrance in if you are choosing to use a fragrance or an essential oil. And then you want your mica colour. So this is our paler blue layer. And as before, you just want to tip it into your batter, making sure to scrape out as much as possible into your jug, which definitely is easier said than done. You will not get the jugs completely, you will not get the little measuring cups completely clean. And then mix it in with the spatula. And the mica colours will look different in soap to how they look in your little measuring cups. Just be aware of that. See, we had quite a kind of baby blue colour, and it's fading to a sort of pale greeny blue. So just be aware of that when choosing micas, and some micas will actually change colour as the soap saponifies and cures. So you will not always get the exact colour that you want, but that just comes with learning what colours fade to, you know, different shades and things like that. So it's all trial and error and experimentation, which is fun. And now, because this is going to be our top layer, we don't need it to be quite so thick because there is no layer going on top of it. So we are at a light to medium trace already, just by that batter being sat up by itself for a little while. So if you get to this stage where it is kind of tracing and leaving a very fine line across the top of the batter, then there is really no need to bring in your stick blender and thicken it. If your batter is thinner than this, then by all means do bring in the stick blender, give it a little whiz and thicken it a little. But if you are already at this kind of thickness just from the stirring that you have done with the spatula and the fact that the soap has been sat out for a little while, there is no need to thicken it any further. So we can pour it over the top of our first layer now. And when it comes to pouring your layers, you want to make sure that the layer you are about to pour does not break through your lower layer. So you want to check that it is fairly nicely set up. And there is a bit of movement to my soap there, but it is fairly nicely set up. If it was moving about too much and still slopping around in the mould, I would leave it to set up and firm up a bit, but we are okay. And when you pour your batter, layer number 2 over layer number 1, you want to use a spatula to break the fall of the batter. And by that I mean, hold your spatula down low, close to the lower layer, and then take your upper layer and pour it slowly over the spatula. And this breaks the fall of the soap batter and helps to make sure that it is not going to break down through that lower layer. And I'm just allowing it to flow naturally over the lower layer. And then once the lower layer is completely covered and you can't see that colour anymore, it is a little bit safer to speed up with the pouring. And you just want to pour it all out until your mould is filled. And you could now leave your soap like this. However, I want to show you a texturing technique for today's design. And when you texture your tops, the batter needs to be at a thick tray. So this is far too thin for me to be able to texture at the moment. So if you want to texture, you will need to pop your soap to one side, and it could be anything from 10 minutes right up to an hour, depending on how long the batter takes to thicken up and what kind of trace you are at. So you will have to keep an eye on it, but I'm going to leave mine for 10-15 minutes, and then I'm going to check on it, and if it's thick enough, I will show you a texturing technique for the top of your soap. So we've left the soap to firm up, and it has been 20 minutes that ours has taken to actually firm up to a consistency that is going to be good for texturing. And I'm going to show you a very simple texturing technique that you can do with a teaspoon. Just remember, if you are using a teaspoon out of your kitchen drawer, this now becomes a soap spoon. It does not go back to making cups of tea or being used for any other purpose. Once it has been used with soap, it becomes a soap only tool. So this is the soap that we want to texture, and what we are going to do is place our spoon into the batter, and we are just pulling up and to the centre. We are going halfway with the spoon, so we are bowing in and up. So we go down and in, and we are pulling up with the spoon, and then we move along and we go down, in, pulling up to the centre, down, pulling up to the centre, and you just want to do this down the entire length of your soap. And this is why the consistency needs to be right, because if your consistency is not firm enough, then the textures will not stay. It will just kind of sink back down to untextured soap, and if it's too thick, it's going to be harder to texture the top. So we've got half of the soap done now, and then you need to just turn the loaf around, and then you are doing exactly the same thing along the other side. So your spoon is going down into the soap batter, and then you are pulling to the centre and up. So down, pull up to the centre, down, pull up to the centre, all the way along your soap loaf. And texturing really does change the entire feel of a soap bar. I love textured tops. I think they look just so pretty. And that is how easy it is to texture the top of a loaf of soap. And that does completely change what that soap looked like before. So that is today's soap complete. And now we are going to do as we did yesterday, grab our little cardboard soap box, and we're going to carefully place our soap loaf inside the cardboard box. We are going to close it up, and we are then going to take a towel, and we are going to use the towel to insulate that soap. So we are covering it with the towel, and the reason for doing this is that we want to try and force gel phase with our soap so that the colours that we have used today pop nice and bright, and so that the soap is just a little bit harder when we unmould it. And that is the reason for the insulation and the towel, because you need to get the heat up to ensure it does go through a gel phase. I am going to check on the soap every now and then by lifting up the towel and just opening the box up and having a little check on the inside, and I'm doing that to check that the soap hasn't started to form a crack across the top. If it has started to form a crack, then it is too warm, so I will remove the towel and move the soap to a slightly cooler place. I don't imagine that this soap is going to crack today, being insulated like this, but it is a good idea and good practice just to check on your soap from time to time, just to keep an eye on how it is doing. And that is kind of everything for the actual soap making for today. So we're going to leave this for 24 hours, and then we are going to come back and we are going to show you how to unmould and cut your soap. So after 24 to 48 hours, you can come back to your soap and you can uncover it, remove the towel, and take it out of its little cardboard box house. So as you can see, this soap has actually got a little bit of soda ash on top of it, and we went over in the terminology video what soda ash is. It is just completely harmless, so there is no need to worry about it. The only thing is that it affects the aesthetic look of the soap a little bit. You can steam it off with a steam cleaner, or you can sponge it off with a damp sponge, or you can leave it. It is entirely up to you. We choose to leave it because because to be honest it doesn't really bother me, and it's a little bit of a pain to sponge or steam it off. Although it's quick and easy, it's still an extra step that you have to take, so I tend to leave it. And now we are going to unmold the soap, and if you watched yesterday's video, we are going to unmold the soap in exactly the same way. We are going to prise the edges of the mould away from the soap in all 4 edges. And if there's any resistance or the soap is sticking or it still looks very soft, I'm then going to stop and put the soap again to one side for a few more hours to firm up a little bit more, but this is more than firm enough. So once I've prized it away from the edges, I tip it up, I put my fingers in the corners underneath, I put my thumbs on the top here just for stability, and then I press upwards with my fingers until it pops away from the base of the mould, which it has done now. I turn it round and I repeat the process on the other side. So pushing up with my fingers, and the soap has released. And then I turn it over and very gently pull the sides of the mould apart with my fingers whilst pressing down gently with my thumbs, and the soap generally just falls out nice and easily at this point, like it has done today. And now we are going to cut this soap, and if you wish to, you can use a ruler and you can measure out where you want your soap bars to be cut. I'm going to do it very roughly. So there, 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 and there. And unlike yesterday's soap that we cut upside down because it had flowers on that we didn't want to drag through the design, we are cutting today's soap the correct way up, because we have got a textured top, and if we were to try and cut this one upside down, it wouldn't be on a flat surface and it would be rocking all over the place. So it is much easier to cut this one the correct way up, so we have got a flat base on the bottom for cutting. So I'm just going to take the knife, try and get it relatively even and straight, and then just press down, pull out, and there you have your 2-layered soap. I'm going to chop the rest of this one up now. And in between chopping each soap, I do clean my knife off with an old tea towel, just because I think it gives a nicer, smoother finish to each bar to do that in between chopping. Right, let's get the rest of the bar done. So I've now chopped up all of our loaf and layered it out so you can see it in all its glory. And hopefully, if you are following our recipe, you have ended up with a loaf that you are happy with and that looks fairly similar to ours. And now what we need to do before we can actually use this soap is the tough part. It's the waiting game. We need to cure these soaps. And this means you need to pop your soap out of the way on a shelf. As you can see, we cure our soaps behind us on these shelves here. And then they need to be on a shelf with good airflow, good ventilation, and a nice gap between them. You don't want them touching each other or stacked on top of each other. There needs to be a gap between the soaps, and they need to sit on that shelf for a minimum of 4 weeks. 6 weeks we generally go for if we can, because we feel that it gives an even firmer, milder bar, but a minimum of 4 weeks before you use the bars. And the reason for that is it allows the excess water in the bars to evaporate, and it gives you a much firmer, much longer lasting bar of soap. You could use these after about 72 hours and they would be perfectly safe, but they wouldn't last very well. They would probably turn to mush in the bath or the shower, and you are not doing your hard work justice by trying to use a bar of soap that hasn't been properly cured. As you can see, and I shall show you as an example, these bars, although they look nice, are still very, very soft. I can squeeze it, and I'm not applying a lot of pressure, but you can see I have made quite a dent in that soap. That is how soft it is at the moment. After 4 to 6 weeks, I would not be able to create that kind of an indent with the pressure that I have just applied. And that is why we cure soap because we want nice firm bars that don't dent or squish or go mushy. So I hope that you've enjoyed watching us make the second soap in our series, the layered soap. I hope that it has helped you. And if you've been following along and making the soaps too, let us know how yours turned out. Drop us a comment in the comments box to let us know how your soaps are looking, because we always love to hear how everyone else is getting on. Tomorrow we will be focusing on it is our last video in our soap making mini series tomorrow, and we will be showing you how to create a swirled soap with some pretty little botanical decorations on top. So tomorrow is swirled soap. Join us then if you're enjoying the series. If you're not enjoying the series, then I guess don't join us then. That's the obvious answer to that one. But yeah, and on a serious note, I hope it is helping you guys. If it is, then please do give us a like, give us a subscribe, and drop us a comment. And we shall see you tomorrow for the final chapter in our Soap Making for Beginners mini-series. Bye!